Yo, what up, everybody? This is Mark from Suicide Silence.
Brian Fair from Shadows Fall.
Gary Hall from Exodus and recently retired from Slayer.
Chris from Bad Wolves.
It's Joe from Briar Rose.
Tyler Burgess here, and
this is Trevor Sternad from the Black Dahlia Murders.
Yo, Igor Cavalera here.
Hey, this is Charlie with Anthrax. I just want to give a shout out to Pendleton and Metal Radio, the podcast.
The podcast to get all your rock and metal news plus reviews.
With new episodes dropping every Sunday, make sure you tune in.
Keep rocking with Pedal to the Metal.
Check it out now,
you motherfuckers.
Keep it metal.
In today's show, I asked our special guest to come on so we could remember the late, great Joey Jordison. You may know him from such bands as Dope, Till Lindemann, Joan Jett, and even his time with Joey in the Murderdolls. And he's also an entrepreneur and the owner of Catfight Coffee. I am talking about Acey Slade. How are you?
Woo! That was quite the intro there, Eddie. I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm good. I know you spent some time from 2002, I believe, to about, I think, 2004 in the Murderdolls. And I know you were doing the Dope thing at the time, because one of my favorite records to this day is Still Life. I love that album.
Oh, thank you.
But how did you meet Joey and get started with that whole like, how did that all come about?
That came about back in 1999 when Dope was touring with Slipknot, which was pretty amazing. And at that time it was like there was this whole thing about like who could be the heaviest, And I've always just been more of a punk rock guy, so I found the whole thing a bit silly. So I was always walking around in like New York Dolls and UK Subs and Iggy Pop and t-shirts like that. Not only because I love those bands, but because I just felt like it was so silly. Everybody trying to mimic Pantera and Slayer, who I love.
Yeah, of course.
But it's like, I have a broad musical palette. It just seemed like everybody was like, yeah, dude, that's brutal. That's heavy, brother. And it was like, well, yeah, obviously, but like, what else is there out there? So anyway, one day I was wearing a Hanoi Rocks t-shirt and Joey's like, dude, you like that band? And I was like, yeah, I do. And he's like, dude, I love Hanoi Rocks. So I was like, yeah, I thought he was taking the piss out of me. I thought he was joking around. Right. And so no, we started talking about music right there and then. And he actually asked me if I wanted to be involved in the Rejects. And he was also familiar with my old band Vampire Love Dolls, which blew me away because we made like 500 CDs, and I think my mom's got 400 of them. So, but Joey and Dizzy had one of them somehow. So
that's awesome because I know like Joey's. I think up to that point, as far as we had known about Joey, like it just seemed like he was. Because the big thing about him was like he had like the whole Roadrunner catalog, so he was into like all these heavy ass bands, you know what I mean? And to hear that he's into Hanoi Rocks is just, it's crazy.
Oh yeah. Joey's taste in music was, I talked to his family quite often, and like Toto was one of his favorite bands, which actually in a way kind of makes sense. Cause I think whoever the drummer for Toto was probably pretty amazing, so.
Yeah. It's cool. It's nice to see like, cause you always get an image of like when somebody's in a metal band, sometimes you only think, oh man, they must only be into like, Decapitated and Slayer and all these bands. But then when you hear like they've got this wide variety of musical taste, it's kind of nice because then it does, because like somebody like me, I'm the same way. Like I may love like, obviously Slayer and the Panteras and whatnot, but like sometimes I'm like, I like to chill out and I'm listening to, I don't know, like the Go-Go's were on the other day and I was kind of rocking out to the Go-Go's a little bit, or like even like Dr. Dre or something like, different things. Cause I feel like it just makes you like your musical tastes, when it's broader, it just makes, I think the creative process so much, sweeter in a way.
Sure. And to expand upon your sweet quote there, it's like, hey man, there's a lot of different desserts. It's like, you can have ice cream, you can have cake, you can have tiramisu,
Yep. And it's like Dimebag's old thing was like, hey, it's 31 flavors, Baskin Robbins.
Yeah.
You know, like why stop at just, only one? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So when you met him, obviously on that tour, what were your first impressions of Joey?
Wow. He just had this ball of energy about him. He just had light coming out of him. And you got to remember at that time, Dope did the very first headline tour not headline tour. We did the first tour that Slipknot did that wasn't a festival, which was the Coal Chamber tour.
Oh, okay.
And I think that we did some one-offs with them as well. Yeah, we did. I'm sure that we did some dates with them, but point being, it was on that first record, and people still didn't know what the guys looked like. They still didn't know what the band looked like. And I mean, I'll never forget my first impression of Slipknot was people talking about this band, and they were like, well, there's 9 guys on stage and they have 2 percussionists and they have a DJ and they all wear matching boiler suits, right? So yeah. I thought it was going to be like Crazy Town or 311. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like, that sounds really lame. And everyone's like, no, it's great. And I was like, that sounds so stupid. Like, because I was focusing on the 9 guys and 1 DJ, 1 sampler guy, 2 percussionists. I was like, dude, that sounds so stupid. I don't know. I was just picturing something very frat boy.
Yeah.
And then I'll never forget, we did a festival in Iowa and I saw them walking around and it was the scariest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. Like just watching, like those guys, when they put their costumes on, they literally became those characters.
Yeah.
Like Clown would like walk around and fucking smash a window out with his pipe, I mean, they took that persona on.
No,
they lived it. Yeah,
that's awesome. Do you like from touring with the Murderdolls, what are some of your favorite like memories or like cool stories that you have from that brief tour?
I mean, it was 2 years.
2 years, you know what I mean.
And we were, so I'm working on my book, Murderdolls book right now. So all this stuff is really fresh in my memory. But, and not only that, but we were going at it non-stop. It was not like I haven't counted up the amount of dates, but I think the only window of time that we had off was from March and April in 2003. And that was it.
Oh, no shit. Okay.
So it was hectic. I mean, it was crazy, but I think that to answer your question, the thing I like the most or I'm most proud about with that band was just the fact that people didn't know what to do with this. And I liked that. And I felt so fortunate. Dope was a band that was very easy to pigeonhole. And and it didn't, the band did well, but it didn't really take off the way everybody expected. And while Dope really represented one part of my personality, Murderdolls were definitely more me. For me to be able to kind of get a second chance, and when I say second chance, it's because at that time Dope had just gotten dropped. And when Joey said, hey, listen, we're going to do 2 weeks in the States, 2 shows in Japan with Guns N' Roses, and 2 weeks in Europe and UK, and then that's it. I went into it with the attitude of like, so first of all, this band is fun as fuck.
Yeah.
And number 2, like musically, this is about a party. And I was like, I've never been to Japan. I've never been to Europe. I was like, and so we just went at it with like, hey, like kind of like, this is going to be the last and only tour we ever do. So let's make it fucking fun.
Yeah.
And it took legs.
Yeah.
And we didn't know, like we were like, nobody wants to hear this kind of music right now. Especially coming from a guy who is very much known to be a part of the new metal thing. And we're not a new metal band. Nobody wants to hear this stuff. So let's just go out there and give them a lot of this and have a lot of fun. And then it took off. So that's what I'm most proud of with that band.
Okay. And like you were saying, like people not wanting to listen to the band, do you feel it's because it's like horror punk was a very like kind of niche kind of thing? Like, you know, the famous ones we know about, like the Damned, the Misfits, you know, on and on. Do you feel that's kind of why, like, it was like something nobody knew what to do with?
I think it was a few things. I think that, you know, all those bands that you mentioned were at a plateau, and at that point we're probably 20 years old, I guess, at that point.
Yeah,
you know, good 15 anyway. And so you have the fact that the bands that we would be compared to were 15 years old, but the fact that we were a younger band at that time, I'm old now, but at that time we were young. So it was like, what are these young guys doing this type of music?
Yeah.
I think a big part of it too is that at that time, a lot of the bands like Korn and the Deftones and stuff like that, you know, they were on their third album. Yeah. And so the industry likes to have things on the treadmill. Like, okay, well, we know if Korn puts out a new record, it's going to sell X amount of units and blah, 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 blah. And so they like familiarity because it's easy for them to market. And then all of a sudden we come along and it's totally different. And it's like, oh shit, well, what do we do with this? We knew how to market Korn and we know how to market Deftones, but this is
how do we market the Murderdolls?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's very theatrical. We got a guy from Slipknot in the band. It's very theatrical, but it doesn't sound anything like that. So we can't really even spin it that way, you know?
Yeah. And I know like that music was right up Wednesday 13's alley, because that's where he was coming from at the time. So for him, it was easy, but for everybody else, it must have been like, well, like you just said, like, well, we got the guy from Slipknot and we've got the guy from Dope. Like, and this sounds nothing like anything they're doing. Like, what in the hell's going on?
Yeah.
You know, that's awesome. But that's awesome though, because it's like it's throwing that curveball, you know what I mean? And saying, hey, fuck it. We're doing what we want to do. And you know, fuck you guys if you don't like it.
Yeah. And to Joey's credit, you know, our label did not want to push the record. They
really,
yeah, in the US they're like this record's not good, we want you to do another Slipknot record, go back to Slipknot, do that. And so Joey pushed back on that. Like, first of all, it took a lot of guts for him to show his diversity with a band as silly as we were, and I mean that like in a fun way, you know. It's I mean, hey, we were. It's very cartoon rock, but to show that side of him when he's known for a band that is as deep and as heavy, and I mean that emotionally, as Slipknot is, and to go like, hey man, like I like to have fun too. You know, that really speaks to his personality, you know.
Yeah. And it was daring for him too, because, and then why not? I mean, you had Corey Taylor at the time coming out with Stone Sour. Sure. So I mean, he was taken off the mask, so why can't anybody else?
Yeah, but to this is nothing against Corey at all, because Corey was being himself. And with being himself, though, it was a bit safer thing where it's like, hey, I'm just taking my mask off and showing that I'm a regular guy making these really great ballad type songs. Of course. Yeah. You know, and so that was easier for them to look at and go, okay, that we can kind of get behind. But with Joey, with the Murderdolls in the States, they were like, we are not getting behind this. This is a train wreck. And they were right. We were a train wreck. That's what made it awesome.
Right. And you guys had such a great look too. That's always my biggest thing. I've always been into like the way bands look. And obviously the music's got to match too, but but I've always liked the look, and you guys had this amazing look that was kind of a nod to like, I don't want to say 80s like kind of metal, but it had like that very Motley Crue-ish kind of look, you know, mixed with the, you know, the punk attitude.
Yeah.
Which I loved.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So then a few years go by after the Murderdolls, and we get the Roadrunner United Sessions, right? And you get to do a track, Tired and Lonely, with Mina Caputo, Joey, and obviously Jim Root, to name a few of the people involved. How did you get involved with that session?
Joey just called me up out of the blue and explained to me what they were doing and asked me if I wanted to play on it. And I was really flattered and really honored. I mean, I was the only guy from the Murderdolls outside of Joey that was on that record. Yeah, it was awesome.
That's cool. Do you think something like that? I know like we're in the COVID world, so like obviously not having to be in the studio and stuff nowadays, because now you can just record what you have to record, send it over. Do you think something like that could ever work again in the future?
No, and I'll tell you why. Only because it was a really expensive record for Roadrunner to make, and it didn't do very good. Yeah, and I don't know why, because honestly, it's a bit of a head scratcher. It's like, who would not? The only thing I can figure was that it was like too many. I don't know how can I explain it. Like, was it one of those things where, like, if that thing would have been an EP, maybe it would have done better? Because I don't know if it confused people having that much diversity and that much spread. I don't know, but I got to tell you, I think it was a great idea. I think it was really brave of Roadrunner to try that. And I'm so confused why the metal community didn't just like lap it up. To me, it's a no-brainer. Like, hey, man, you got all these great people trying things together. I don't know. That was weird to me. Why it didn't do good.
And the thing too is like super groups were starting to become such a thing at that time. And it's weird because as a kid, I used to sit there and think like in, in sports, they have all-star, teams. And I would always, as a kid, sit there and be like, oh, imagine if, this guy recorded a song with this one and like they had this guy. And it felt like that's what it was. Like it was like an all-star like team. And it was just like, all right, create music and do something.
Yeah. I think I don't know, to me, it's strange how other genres of music like rap and country, when it comes to collaboration, they're all about it.
Yeah.
And metal, somehow or another, it's like when it's becoming a little bit less so, I guess. But for a long time, it's been like, wait, they're collaborating. All right, what's the angle? What are they like? Metal people get suspicious of collaborations, and it's like, well, maybe they just like each other's music and are like, dude, it'd sound cool if you played on this,
But there was a time, I feel like, I don't know if it was the 70s or like even before that, where it wasn't odd for one artist to record with another artist. Because I remember, there's the Traveling Wilburys, where you have like, those guys, and you had Lennon always, collaborating with other musicians. So I don't know where it went, where all of a sudden it just got weird, for that to happen.
I don't know, man. I think part of it has to do with, on the flip side of that, to the loyalty that metal bands have. Like, when you like a band, you love that band, and you don't want to see them color outside the lines, which isn't kind of really fair to the artist. But they also have to understand that guy probably will buy 3 of your T-shirts too. Not that I'm making it about money, but I'm showing the level of loyalty.
Yeah, of course.
Sometimes that people think that their loyalty somehow makes them think that the artists owe them something in a way. You know what I mean? What they owe them is to be artists,
And I've always been and here's another thing you'll always hear, and it's like, you want an artist, you're not the same person at 19, 20 years old that you are when you're 40 years old, you know what I mean? Or 50 or whatever it may be. Right. So it's like, you're not going to write the same song every single time for the next 20 years. Cause obviously, you grow as a person and your musical tastes change, not entirely, but sometimes all of a sudden you start liking other things as you get older. So you want to experiment a little bit more, but man, in the metal community, it's like the biggest, like they shun upon it. Oh my God. Did you see that, for example, Korn did a, electronic dubstep record? Like, what the hell's going on in the world? You know what I mean? And it's kind of sad because you want to see artists be able to branch out a little bit. You know what I mean? Because you grow as a person, and you write differently as you get older.
Sure.
and it's, I don't know, but I know. So the Murderdolls got back in 2009. Well, and I remember I was reading in an interview in 2009, you were like kind of adamant that you wanted the Murderdolls to get back, but the schedules were always, conflicting, obviously Joey having to do the Slipknot thing all the time, or Wednesday 13 doing his solo stuff. How difficult was it at the time to get these guys back? And was that kind of ultimately the reason you weren't involved with the band anymore?
Yeah, well, at that time, I'd started playing with Joan Jett.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know, that's kind of a difficult question because, I think Joey wanted to maintain control over the songs and over the record, and so did Wednesday. So they kind of wanted to keep things sort of encapsulated with just the two of them. So I'd kind of be the wrong person to ask about that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I just didn't know. But I know. So after Ben passed away, I believe you guys did the reunion shows.
Yeah.
I know now that Joey's gone, any chance we'll ever get another tribute show, or maybe, see a collaboration between you, Wednesday, and anybody else like Eric?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's really unfortunate about the timing with Joey passing is that we were in talks to do a 20th anniversary reunion tour. And so we started ramping all that up right when he passed. So I'm always open to it, and in fact, I'm really adamant about honoring the 20th anniversary of the record.
Yep.
I do think that, it was a huge part of my life, and I know it was a huge part of everybody involved's lives. So we're going to do our best to honor the 20th anniversary of the record, and then I think we'll see what happens, because the wounds are still really deep. I mean, it's the second 2 years. So
I know.
I mean, it was one of those things where when Ben passed, oh my God, that was really heavy. But we could all look at each other and go, "Hey, but we're still here." Like we can still do this. And then Joey passes. It's like, all right, well, we're not all still here. It's one thing to replace one guy, but to replace two, they would never be replaced. I mean, I was talking to Joey's family about it the other day, and it's like, they said, well, who would replace Joey? And I'm like, well, nobody. Like, nobody can replace, So I don't know. I know that the door is always open. I know that I have a lot of things planned for the 20th anniversary. I'm going to do a vinyl re-release that I hope has some never before heard tracks. I hope, hopefully some live tracks. I'm digging all that up right now. I've been working with Warner Brothers as far as going through the tracks, finding all the assets, getting everything together. So, so I had actually planned to have that ball rolling in January of this past year, January, February. And then we started talking about the reunion, and it was like, all right, well, let's put the re-release on ice for a minute. And then Joey passed, and I was like, I don't want to look at any of this shit.
Yeah.
And now I'm getting back into it, because honestly, I can't let his memory fade away. And I do feel like certain parties are okay with that, and I'm not.
Which is sad. Yeah. But I mean, you're doing the best you can, and that's all you can do.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example. Like the other day, there's an Ellen DeGeneres show where this kid was a drummer. Did you see that?
Yeah, with the Slipknot thing.
Yeah.
I believe, but he mentioned he was a big fan of, I believe, their current drummer.
Well, I didn't catch that part. However, what I did catch was that he played a song off of, what song did he play? It was something off All Hope Is Gone, I think.
Yeah. I don't know if it was Sulfur or
Yes, it was Sulfur.
Yeah.
That was Joey's song. Joey wrote that, Would have been nice to give that kid a Joey Jordison signature snare.
See, that's where I could be wrong. I mean, I could be 100% wrong. But that's the part that I thought was weird was I was like, okay, they didn't give him a Joey Jordison snare. They gave him, and I apologize. I can't remember the current guy's name. Max. Yeah. They gave him his signature. He's a phenomenal drummer too. Not going to take that away from him. But I just thought it was weird because I'm like, wait a minute, that's a Joey song. So we're like, I don't, whatever. You know what I mean? But all right. So to kind of wrap up the Joey portion of this, in your own words, if you had to describe his legacy and his impact on the metal scene, what would you say?
I mean, nobody, there was no drummer like him when he came out. There just wasn't. Like, he made not just drummers look at his drumming and go, whoa, but he was like, he almost had that Tommy Lee type thing about him.
Yeah.
But in a very different way, where it was like, you know, in most bands, I mean, you know, let's face it, there's a million memes about bass players and drummers, right? Okay, let's just put it out there, and they're all very funny, but you know, generally they're regarded as the guy in the band who nobody wants to hear anything from. You know, it's all about the singer and the guitar player. And Joey was one of those drummers that made everybody go, but that guy is awesome. You know, I want to be like that guy. What's the story with that guy? Hey man, like, I think that band's great, but I think the drummer is the guy. Do you know what I mean? And there wasn't any bands like that back then, you know, that I can think of.
I have to agree with you because I remember the first time I ever saw, I had heard the music, you know what I mean? And then I was like, well, you know, I'll check them out and I'll go see them live. I'll see what this is all about. And I remember the first time I ever saw Slipknot live, my eyes were just locked on him the whole time because it was like, holy shit, who the fuck is this guy? You know what I mean? And it's like you said, he had that very Tommy Lee kind of effect to him where it's electrifying when you see him back there. Yeah. You know what I mean? He almost belonged in the forefront with everybody. And I have to agree with you 100% on that.
You got to remember too, at that time, it's weird because they got lumped in with the new metal thing. And I understand it, but you know, at that time, it was all about like hip hop grooves. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and I keep saying Korn and Deftones just because they were the biggest new metal bands at that time.
Yeah.
But all the bands were about like, you know what I mean? And then the beat part, then the breakdown. Slipknot was fast. And that's what their songs were, you know.
And they were consistent too. They were just, there wasn't like, I mean, it wasn't like there was like, they were consistent. Like, it was like they were beating the shit out of your eardrums the whole entire time from beginning to end. And it was like, wow. Like they were, I agree with you. The whole lumping, it's such an easy thing for, and I don't even think it's not music fans. I just think it's an easy thing for critics to kind of lump a band in. Yeah. Like, okay, they came out the same time as, you know, System of a Down and Korn and these guys. All right, they're a new metal band. You know, never mind what they really are. And I remember reading, there was a book series called A 33 and a Third, and they tackle an album with every book. And there was one on AC/DC. And the funniest thing to me was reading that American critics at the time introduced AC/DC as a punk rock band, which they clearly were not. If you, I mean, you know, punk better than anybody. And
well, I can kind of see that though, because, you know, I mean, if you ask Steve Jones, like who his favorite guitar player was, he'd probably say Mick Ronson from David Bowie and Chuck Berry. So it kind of comes, there is a similar thread there, but you're right. It's like they didn't know where else to put it. So that's the box they needed to put it in, which I can see why they did. But at the same time, it's like, can't you just be fucking rock and roll?
That's what I'm saying.
Motorhead's a rock and roll band. You know, they're not.
I feel like at the end of the day, like I get it, like I don't know, I feel like being punk is kind of like a badge, you know what I mean, for some, but I just feel like it's all rock and roll at the end of the day. Like whether you're punk rock or you're AC/DC kind of rock or whatever, it's just all rock and roll.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I feel like because it all roots from the same place anyways. So
yeah. Well, I mean, half the people that put those labels on stuff are, like you said, critics or industry people, and they're people that conformed to doing a corporate side of a creative field, and so they need to make these songs these bands conform to their boxes to make their jobs.
Yeah, and it happens way too often. Too many bands get pigeonholed into a genre, and sometimes that ruins bands if you think about it, because I've heard of a lot of bands that at a time they got pigeonholed into a certain scene and it was like they couldn't escape it, even though they had nothing to do with anything those bands were doing, which is sad. I want to talk about the coffee company because Catfight coffee is awesome. Listen, I'm going to be 100% honest with you right now. I am not a big coffee drinker, right? I prefer iced coffee over anything. And most of the time I was going to the usuals, like, we're from the Northeast. It's the Dunkin' Donuts, the Starbucks, that kind of stuff. And I remember people going crazy for this kind of, what's up?
New Hampshire?
Well, Boston.
Boston. Okay. All right.
So, people going crazy for coffee, and there's like the coffee addicts. Oh my God, and I would be like, what is the big deal? Like, just, it's coffee. Right. And then I tried your Tura Santana blend, and I got to be honest, I've never gone into a coffee cup without dumping a shit ton of sugar in it, right, to make it sweet. And I remember watching a Cattail Hour with you, and you were like, listen, don't put any sugar, just try it with like maybe a little bit of cream or milk or whatever you put in, and just try it, right? Because you'll taste the flavors. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I'm like, is this gonna suck? I don't know. And I made the cup, and I was actually pleasantly surprised at how good it actually tasted. And I don't know if that is because of maybe, I've been fed BS from Dunkin' Donuts and, whatever for so long. It was amazing.
Well, when Dunkin' Donuts first came out, actually, I mean, I'm such a nerd, so if I start going way too coffee nerd, just shut me up. But Dunkin' originally, their business model was that no pot of coffee was left on the burner for more than I think 19 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
And to this day, actually, the beans that they buy really high quality coffee beans. So you got to give them credit there. But yeah, I think that part of it is that the coffee game has changed so much. It's about mass consumption, and anytime you mass do anything, it dilutes a bit,
But I just feel like the quality that you guys have, like maybe, like, I don't know if it's because it was like, man, I've tried, different coffees without anything and never being a fan. Then all of a sudden tasting yours, it was like, wow, this is amazing. So
thank you.
You're welcome. But how did you
did you know the Frappuccino started in Boston?
No, I did not know that.
Yes. So there's a guy named George Howell, and George Howell, I forget what the name of his chain was, but he had a chain in the Northeast in the Boston area. Okay. And when Starbucks was like, when I say small, they had like 100 stores or whatever.
Yeah.
Or another, he like one of their execs went to one of his shops in Boston, and he had the Frappuccino. And rather than rip them off, they bought the whole chain. But
yeah, okay.
Boston.
No shit. All right, you learn something new every day. But how did you? So when did you decide that this was a venture that you wanted to get into, and like what inspired you to get into coffee making?
Well, I've loved coffee my whole life. literally since I was a little kid. Like I could tell you at least 3 or 4 different stories of me before I was 12 years old drinking coffee, you know.
Okay.
It was a big part of my family. You know, I grew up in a family, my grandpop was an entrepreneur, always slugging down coffee. My mom and dad were entrepreneurs, always slugging down coffee. And I guess that was just in my blood to start my own business and slug down coffee, but I figured I'd just make my own.
Yeah. But so going into it, like, was it difficult? Did you get any roadblocks on the way? Because obviously you've got to kind of taste and figure out what works and what you want to use. So like, I mean, was it a huge process?
No, well, what happened was when I was touring with Joan specifically, when I was touring with Joan Jett, we were playing a lot of B&C markets, and B&C markets would be Chelmsford.
Okay.
Worcester.
Yeah.
Worcester market. Although Worcester's a bit of an exception because they got such great fucking fans there. So, but as far as the city goes, that would be a B market, right?
Okay.
We played a lot of places like that with Joan, and it was right when smartphones were and Yelp was like a big thing. And I would play these places like, so for example, Worcester, you know, I'd be like, man, what the fuck is there to do around this town, you know? And what I figured out was that if I went onto Yelp and if what I wanted was good coffee, but I also figured out like, well, usually like the independent coffee places that aren't Starbucks, usually there's like a tattoo shop there. Usually there's a vintage record store or a used instrument store, something like that. Yeah. Like everything that's involved around our culture, there's usually a coffee shop there, you know? So it started more as like a thing of like, yes, I want good coffee, but I also want to find out where the cool part of town is. And so just for shits and giggles, I started my own like Yelp reviews of like all these coffee places. And then I'd always buy a bag from the places that were great. And then from there, I started doing coffee journaling, like, well, this seems really good. And I just kept going down the rabbit hole. And, you know, eventually it reached a point where 4 or 5 years ago, I was playing in big bands, but I still never had stability, like financial stability. Okay. And I got to do something that's a bit more stable. I'm playing in all these great bands, but you know, if they all are if their touring cycles end at the same time, I've got 4 or 5, 6 months off where I'm not working, you know?
Yeah.
And we knew we wanted to start a company together. I started one with some shitty business partners, and then we started this 2 years ago. And so I've been doing the coffee game for about 4.5 years and Catfight.
Okay. You were talking about, I've always been interested because I don't know if the term hired gun is an acceptable term, but is it something, because I know nowadays being a hired gun isn't as bad as maybe back in the day because you were kind of a man with no band.
Yeah.
You know, have you always has it, I'm going to try to ask this. Is being a hired gun more difficult to kind of, because like you said, there's no financial stability. Because like if a tour ends, that's it, you know, and if everybody's cycles have ended. Oh man, where was I going with that?
Well, I think I get what you're trying to say. I hate it, to be honest with you. Can't stand it. But I just happen to be the luckiest fucking guy on the planet that I play with bands that I love.
Yeah.
So, I mean, honestly, if things would have gone every step of the way, like I never intended on joining other bands. So like when I was in Dope, I was like, well, honestly, what I thought was when I joined Dope, I was like, hey, I'm going to we'll do 2 records. We'll tour the world. I don't know if this is going to take legs or not. If it doesn't take legs, I'll go back to Pennsylvania and I guess figure out, like get a job at Walmart or whatever. I don't know. And had I not gotten that call from Joey, I never would have thought to go on to something else. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when I got a call from Joey and, you know, started playing in that band. At that time, I quit dope. Dude, I mean, when we stopped our album cycle in 2004, it was like, okay, we're going to get back together again. We're going to do this again. Joey's got to do Slipknot. Everybody do their own thing, but we're going to do this again.
Yeah.
And, you know, then I did a bunch of other things, but, you know, I ended up grabbing the Joan Jett gig. Well, who would be stupid to turn that down, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm great that like I've had all these opportunities, but if it was up to me, I would have stayed in dope forever. Had we sold enough records to warrant that, I would have stayed in the Murderdolls. You know, like at all the bands that I would have played in, I would have gladly stayed in forever had it worked out.
Yeah. You know what was the weird thing? I remember you mentioning after the album Life, like the band was dropped. It just seems so weird because I felt like Life was such an amazing record, and definitely a great follow-up to the first record. It just seems so weird that like that kind of happened. Like, was it because like was there just no interest from the label to further pursue the band?
Yeah, there were several things. The first is that they spent a retarded amount of money. Shouldn't say that. They spent a ridiculous amount of money on the band for the first record, an amount that they never should have. Like if they would have spent half the amount of money that they spent, we would have sold the same amount of records. Like they spent Mariah Carey money on this, and you're never going to get that return. You know?
Yeah.
So we went into that second record owing the record company a lot of money, and then 9/11 happened. And even things like it was just such a bad time in the music. It was really just bad timing. Like the record industry didn't know whether to make heads or tails of streaming and downloading.
I was just gonna say, yeah.
9/11 happened, and if you remember in the video for Now or Never, it showed like we're playing in a glass cage, and the fans jump through the glass cage and start dancing with us. One TV said, "You can't show people jumping through glass," and we're like, why? And they're like, well, because people jumped out of the towers on 9/11. I mean, Lenny Kravitz's Fly got banned. Sugar Ray's Fly got banned. If you had a song that said Fly in it, it wasn't going to get played. So it was really bad timing combined with owing the record company money.
But I feel like, you know, and I get it, because at the time streaming was brand spanking new. You know what I mean? You had like those companies like Napster and everything. But I feel like the industry should have sort of known better. I mean, I feel like this was a problem they ignored for a very long time. And I feel like bands suffered because of the industry's bad decisions.
Oh yeah, dude. Let me tell you something. Okay, I get excited telling this story. So forgive me because I feel like I could have saved everybody.
Right.
Okay, think about this, and you're spot on. They either stuck their heads in the sand or they tried to sue Napster. Right? Think about this. Okay, I'll never forget when I got a Kindle. You know what that is, right? The book thing.
Course. Yeah. With
a Kindle, you could download all these old books for free. Okay, those in the music business, you call those catalog pieces. So that would be like AC/DC's Black and Black, Prince's Purple Rain, I don't know, Van Halen 1984, right? Yeah. Those are all records that have sold 10 million copies where they've recouped on them several times over, right?
Yeah.
In other words, I could get Bram Stoker's Dracula because that book has made tons of money, right? Yeah. So when you get, there's a ton of stuff that you could download for free. They did this thing where you could download a sample of the book, and it was like a little bit sketchy in a way. It was like, okay, you download this book, you get it for 5 days. If after 5 days you don't return it, we're going to charge you, and you got to keep it. So if you wanted to read really quickly, you could read the whole book, return it, and then you didn't have to pay for it. But of course, what would happen? Everybody would forget about it.
Yeah.
And also, they would do this thing where, like, if you shared it with a friend, you both got $5 off or something. I forget what it was, but I'll never forget looking at that going, you know, I was like, what if the music business would have done this? Like, what if your MP3 player came with AC/DC's Black and Black. And let's face it, a big reason why people were stealing these records is because they had already put out, using Black and Black as the example, you already bought it on vinyl, you bought it on cassette, you might have bought it on mini DV, and now you buy DVD, and now there's this new thing and they want you to fucking buy it again. Forget it. Get it for free over here, and it sounds exactly the same. So it's given us MP3 players that were loaded up with, like, let's say credit for 20 records. But then after that, you had to start buying them, or you could borrow them, or you could share them. But that's not what they did.
I know. And it's sad because I'm telling you, so many bands suffered because of that. Like, I mean, obviously, like, just like you said, the label gives you so much money to make a record. So obviously, just like the movie industry, if I'm going to give you $100 million, you better make me more than $100 million, right? Otherwise, you're out of business.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I mean, that's what happened. All of a sudden, a band gets huge because You Spin Me Round goes fucking crazy, American Psycho, all that stuff. And it's like you said, let's throw ridiculous amounts of money at them because they just had this huge hit.
Yeah.
Right. You guys obviously suffered because of all the circumstances like 9/11, the industry and the streaming. And it's like, well, fuck, you guys didn't recoup my money. Like, F you guys. And all of a sudden.
And the thing is so stupid about that too, is that so many of these bands, like even Dope, it's like, we've gone on to still have a career.
Yeah.
You know,
of course.
Spotify has, God, I forget how many, Spotify spins, but it's like in the millions, right?
Yeah.
They were short-sighted. They should have just said, well, yeah, we spent too much money on that first record, but you know what? Probably by the fourth record, we could make that money back.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so in a way, it was a terrible time for the band and for a lot of artists. But the way that when you look back on it, the thing you're lucky about is like, they're like, well, they spent millions of dollars marketing something that they weren't content to get $1 million return on, but we're okay getting a $500,000 return or whatever that might be. Like, I'm not speaking money in terms of money, more in terms of goals, you know?
Yeah.
Like, of course, dude, do we wish that Dope was still was an arena headlining band? Yeah, of course. But you know what? Every time I step on the tour bus and I'm playing to 100 or 1,000 people, I'm grateful. And the only reason we can do that is because those guys gave up on us.
Yeah. But it's tough though. I mean, you look at a band and it's like, you know, once you get dropped by a label, then it's, I don't know if it's like a curse on bands, like, because then all of a sudden you're seeing like, you know, this album's on this label, the next one is on the next different label, and then the next one's on like on another completely different label. And you're like, what in the hell is going on? Like, what is the deal? And it's, I don't know if it's where a band all of a sudden becomes like, oh, you know, they're has-beens now because look at this, they can't keep a label. And it's sad because some great bands have suffered from that.
Yeah.
You know,
well, and it feels that way as the artist, you know what I mean? Like, I'll never forget the day that we got dropped. It just felt like, and especially because you get into such a lifestyle where it's like you're either touring, writing, or recording constantly.
Yeah.
And yes, somebody's bankrolling it. Of course, you have to pay it back, but it's just nonstop. Then all of a sudden comes to a screeching halt, because what happens when you get dropped is most times you don't have a publicist anymore. Your booking agent drops you.
Yeah.
Like your record label doesn't just drop you. Everybody kind of drops you.
Yeah.
And so it feels terrible. It is a terrible feeling.
Yeah. And I know one of the biggest things somebody always told me, when you're in a band, one of the most important things to do is to own your publishing.
Yeah.
Because ultimately that's your money makers, your publishing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, not too many bands do that. But one last question for you, and I'll let you go. I know you were doing the tour with Till Lindemann, and you guys did the Russia kind of tour. Any thoughts on what's going on? Because obviously everybody knows the situation in Ukraine. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's horrendous. But one thing that I think is looking at the positive on it, I feel like this is the first time ever that people are really smart enough to say, this is all about politicians. This isn't about the people.
Yeah, exactly.
And that we're all giving to one another on both sides is really amazing. You know, there's no like, hey, fuck those guys. It's like, no, fuck that guy.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference right now. And that's pretty cool, actually. I mean, that we've evolved enough to be able to see that.
Right. I know. And that was the thing that I noticed. And I was kind of like, for the first time, kind of proud of humanity for once, where it was like, thank God, like we're not like blaming all Russians for one asshole's vision.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And we've known in history, we've done that way too many times where it's like, you know, oh, you know, every German is a Nazi. No, not every German was a Nazi. Not everybody agreed with that. You know what I mean? And it should be the same way here.
More recently, my wife is from Taiwan, so she's Asian. So she still deals with Asian hate. Still.
Which is unfortunate because it's not everybody represents. Yeah. You know, it's sad. It's sad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But, you know, the bottom line is that anytime, you know, that I know that they're trying to do a little bit of, well, that Ukrainian president was crooked and, you know, there were things with their government that wasn't right. But all of that is trying to distract us from the fact that they are using high-tech missiles and launching them into civilian houses and installing. That's never okay.
I know. I think I was reading something. A maternity ward was recently hit the other day, and it's like, are you kidding me, man? Like, really? Like, I just wish politicians were the ones that went out and fought each other instead of you know the poor people having to suffer from it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, put them in a celebrity death match kind of deal.
I hear you.
And let them deal with it. But all right, man. I want to thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I know it got a little confusing there, timing wise. So my apologies on that.